But I do want to do the roll call and determination of quorum.
Paul Hello,
Here.
Jamie Jackson, Matthew Lahane,
Here.
Osama Mean, Kathy Coffey, Adam Derrick, Melody Fowler, Matthew Bewley, yes, Kate Gibson, Christine Hefner, Leon Hughes, Daniel Koenig, Cassie Lord, Stephen Miner, Nick Ruiz,
Here.
Bob Schneider, and Rodney White.
Here.
Okay.
So what I would like to do, we have a lot like on the end of the agenda, and I wanted to get the smart scope. I do though want to skip like 3 and 4 until more people are here. As well as 5, the consent agenda. Number 6 is a action item. Why don't you go down to the VRE items and start basically with 7B. And then after 7B, we can maybe go to 7A. And then hopefully by that point, maybe we'll have more people here.
Yeah, why don't we start with a discussion of the Leland Road and Brook Road station improvements, and I want to run this just kind of as a ask me questions, and from what I know I can help answer. So just want to present the facts on these 3 projects because there's been a lot of questions over the past couple of TAC meetings about them. And all of this information is current as of the preparation of the most recent CIP budget. So a lot of the things are still moving targets, and we still have to work with our friends at OIP and GWRC on some reallocation of funding for certain things. But so as it was scoped, the Leland Road parking expansion, there's a little over 1,000 spaces today. Today's utilization is fairly low, and that's just a recognition of, or a reflection rather, of the depressed ridership on the Fredericksburg line. But the way that the project was originally scoped was an additional 220 spaces in the parcel, and the part of the parcel that you see there. The project would have also included some stormwater management facilities, as well as an expanded path from the parking facility to the platform entrance. And so what we're proposing to do with this project, and I'll explain on the next 2 projects why we're doing this, is done some analyses through the system plan and kind of post-system plan analyses of future ridership projections. We propose that we defer this project and remove it from the CIP, simply because we don't feel that it's the best use of the capital funds that we have programmed for the Brook, Leland, and Leland parking, kind of triplet. With expected ridership, I mean, in 2030, we might just be getting to close to almost being full, but still with capacity. And that assumes a very conservative mode share where virtually nobody is carpooling. Everybody who is using that station facility is driving in their own vehicle. So that is the internal kind of intention. We still have to get concurrence from OIP on that. Those conversations have not occurred yet. So I just want to pause on that one. Matthew, I know you had requested more information on this, so I want to see if you have any thoughts on that.
So I guess I just had a general question, like if that's done, like can you repurpose the smart scale funding to another project that needs it, so like you wouldn't lose the funding?
Yeah, so that's going to be our intention, is to take, because all of the smart scale funding that was part of round 2, it was part of the Fredericksburg line capacity improvements. Now the capacity increasing element of that project was the addition of 11 rail cars that we are actually purchasing. They're going to be delivered here in the next year and a half. So that is where we got our capacity score, basically, for the smart scale program. So these projects, I think we feel that we have a strong case to be made to be able to reallocate them within the same triplet of projects, because it's still serving the same, a similar purpose. So yes, we are going to look to OIP to concur for us to move the 5.5, what is it, $5.51 million of smart scale off of this project and onto the Leland station project. So. Any other?
So I guess I just had another general question. So, I know like back before COVID, like this lot was pretty busy. And there used to be like, just to the south of that, there was, I think, like a dirt lot that people were like parking on, it was like overflow, and that used for economic development, some other projects?
It was a
that's
private
gone?
property,
Okay.
so it was purchased, I don't know, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and it was, access was removed, public
Okay.
access, so. There's nothing to my knowledge going on that property, it's still an empty dirt lot, maybe used for truck parking or something. Nothing. There's only one entry exit to the current lot.
I mean, the other general question that I have is, I know like with, the president ordering the federal workers like back to work, taking away telework, like, is there any possibility that like the demand on this lot could go up a lot again where it's be full?
So we took a look at some of the like, using the best case assumptions, and it's such a moving target right now, but understanding you know, what our ridership could do in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months versus like, you know. And there is, you know, expected to be a small, you know, bump, a noticeable bump, but I think what's really driving the uncertainty is the, you know, competing proposals to do a significant reduction in federal workforce, which would mean that those people aren't doing any sort of commuting. So we just don't have firm enough data that we can say, yes, this is gonna happen, no, it's not. I will say that even if, I mean, looking at our numbers, even if every single federal employee who has the ability to work in a hybrid, you know, capacity started going back 5 days a week, you still wouldn't be at capacity by 23 at the station. And I think part of that's because prior to the pandemic, there was still some telework going on. I believe it was 4.6 days a week was the in-office rate prior to the pandemic. It was something like that, 4.48 days on average. So right now, the average is in the threes. It's like 3.2 or 3.3, 3.27 days in the office. So the bump between 3.2 and 5, but it wouldn't really be 5 because there's always going to be vacation. People are going to do things. Is a relatively small number. So yeah, but we did look at that, you know, a couple months ago.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, according to VDOT's Park Zen Park Restricker app, whatever it is, it shows 44% full right now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Not doing too bad.
Yeah. And they are, so Leland has become, for some reason, has become a carpool hub too. So I don't know to what extent, we need to have better data on that. That's something we don't track directly, is of the people parking at Leland, how many are actually using VRE versus just using it as a meetup for carpool.
Right.
I don't know if we'd be slugging there, probably not.
So Nick, where that, commuter lot expansion was, I guess, conceived, isn't there a hill there?
Yes, a very large,
Expensive?
yes,
Because of that? Okay.
very large on the kind of page left, so like west,
Yeah.
the west side. That was one of the things where, as we started to take a look at the cost estimate, revised cost estimates, the retaining wall cost for that, you can see kind of in the red, would have just been, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was like, you're basically building a surface lot for the price of a structured parking. And on a per space basis.
Yeah, we had an expensive commuter lot that we completed. We had to come up with like an extra $900,000 at, Route 1 in Commonwealth. And there is a hill there, but I think it's not as big as the hill here.
Yeah.
So the land underneath that black new section, who currently owns it? Do you own it?
I think it's Stafford County.
Not
I
sure.
believe it's Stafford.
What I'm trying to establish is whether you need to purchase it from private owners.
And I know it's not private, and but I apologize, I don't know if it's commission owned or if it's county owned.
My recollection was that Stafford owned it.
Yeah, the
I
reason,
think
That's why the location.
the reason I was asking is because if you are deciding to not go ahead with this work now, I mean, to Paul's point, I think it would be probably a good idea to have the land parked and not sold off or especially if it's already owned by either the county or some
Yeah.
government-related institution, to provide for future needs, which you might not be ready to
Right.
move on with right now. But should the county own it or somebody own it and they then dispose of it because you no longer need it, in quotes, and you then later come back and need it, then you've got a much bigger, expensive
Yeah.
problem on your hands.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously the will of the county is, what you guys want to do is what you guys are going to end up doing, but we would likely strongly endorse that proposal to keep it. I mean, it's never a good idea to sell off land that you might or might not use, just because the future is very uncertain right now. So, but that's the concept as it stands today. I think there's opportunities still to regain ridership and grow market share without the use of this additional 220 spaces. So
Yeah, now, was this smart scale application, was this part of the FAMPO one, or is this the Northern Virginia one, or was?
I believe it was a Northern Virginia.
Okay.
I believe it was a Northern Virginia, but that was a 2018 submittal. So
Sounds like Stafford doesn't have any concerns with this.
Yeah, I think Nick will explain a little bit more in the next couple slides where this is going.
where it's all going, yeah. So if I can move on, if anyone has any other questions on this, I can move on to the next slide. So we're not just throwing the money away, right? So what we propose to do is move the majority of that money onto the Leland Road Station Improvement Project, which is a platform lengthening project that would allow the station to host full 8-car trains, because that's going to be our network standard is platforms that can at least hold 8-car trains. That cost right now is just shy of $12.1 million cost estimate. And so we move the smart scale funding off of the Leland parking project, and we basically take the 1.4 million in GWRC van pool funding, which we're still working with Kate, because there's some CMAQ money also that we're kind of switching around. And we've submitted an application this past fall for 2.15 million in commuter choice. That's NBTC's, capacity, toll payer benefits to the toll payer signature grant funding.
What's the funding from GWRC on the other one?
On Leland parking or on this one?
No, on Brook.
So
Oh, you're still getting to that.
yeah, that'll be the next slide.
Oh, never mind. Hold my question.
Yeah. So, but as it stands now, because there's a little over $2 million in GWRC money available for the pair of these projects, and so we're proposing that 1.4 million go to Leland. You've got the added smart scale funding, and then we're coming in for what we think is a very competitive application. We haven't gotten any word on selection. That happens in the spring for this commuter choice funding, and that would fully fund the project. And you can see there the construction start and complete dates that consistent with some of the work that VPRA is doing in the corridor for the construction of the third track, which will happen, in concert with this project, but it wouldn't be in concert because that third track is going to be built page north, page top, Railroad West, where you see that light blue line there going across the top of the pair of tracks. So, any questions on that one? All right. Finally, Brook. Similar, concept, lengthening the platform for 8-car trains. And that project is slightly less expensive, just owing to the geography, $10.6 million. And, we do move some, I think we had, I can't remember now how much smart scale, but I believe we're doing a little bit of a split. So we're taking the parking funds, and I think most of it's going to Leland, and then some of it is going to Brook. And then we have the 500,000 in CMAQ, that's a FAMPO source, and then the 891 in GWRC, that's to answer your question.
Yeah.
So that project is also fully funded. So, I mean, I think you understand kind of the concept here, taking a project that we feel has limited utility in the near or midterm, moving the money over, hopefully grabbing some good funding, from the NBTC funds, community choice funds, and fully funding two very strong projects that we can move forward here in this decade.
When you say you're discussing with Kate, are you discussing the 499 654 CMAC as a possible 5307 swap?
That would be a
Because
Christine
that has
question.
not been allocated.
Yeah, that would be a Christine question. She's been talking to her more closely about the CMAC and whether or not that gets swapped or not. I do know that there's verbal concurrence that the GWRC amounts that we're listing here are kind of what, what they still would need to go to the board.
So the GWRC amounts that are in here, I think were already approved in writing. The resolution of the GWRC board and was sent to PRTC because PRTC actually makes the application to federal and then allocates it to the project. And I believe those are like 2 years ago already, I think that was done.
Yeah,
The CMAC money, there was a request from the TAC that they do a similar swap of this CMAC money with 5307 money, but we needed to wait for, there was some, it was unclear how much 5307 money was currently available, and so GWRC didn't want to do the swap until PRTC had clarified exactly how much money there is and in which year, because they had a staff member who was doing this work resign, and there was a bit of mess to clean up. So I believe that is now resolved. The kind of how much money should be available to GWRC to allocate. I think that has now finally been resolved. It's taken a very long time.
yeah.
I think that's resolved. So the next step would then be to, again, request that 499 be swapped 5307. Now that they have some clarity as to how much money would be involved, it would again take action by the GWRC board, because they're the ones who effectively, it's legally a recommendation to PRTC. It's not an instruction, but they have kind of sub-allocated the responsibility to the GWRC board. So GWRC board then needs to, I guess, have a process, call for projects, have this as a project, decide to fund it, make a decision, send a resolution to PRTC, and then PRTC does the FTA, I believe it is, that does that 307 allocation, and then sub-allocated to you all to replace that CMAC fund.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a 5-step process.
So, and I think the thing that's still, to be formally agreed upon is the reallocation, because I think in the original documentation for allocation of GWRC funds to both of these projects, the dollar amounts are different. And that's because of the CMAC swap on the taking, because there's
The dollar amounts of the GWRC Vanport money should be exactly correct.
I think the total is correct, less the CMAC amount. I can double check that. But
It was a direct swap. So every dollar
okay,
of 5307 that was allocated to these two projects represented a dollar of CMAC that was removed.
okay,
It was an exact swap.
okay,
But there wasn't enough money at that stage in that round 2 years ago to fund this last 499, which is why it's such an odd number. That was just the amount of money that was available.
yeah,
And so that was left. So there should be a direct dollar for dollar swap between the Vanport money and the CMAC money, which was taken off. But it left that 499.
okay,
And now we could conduct a second process. When I say we, I mean GWRC.
yes.
Well, we already made this request 2 years ago, I think, or a year and a half ago at least. And they couldn't do it because there was questions about how much money was actually available in Vanpool 5307. from PRTC because they'd had a staff member leave with a bit of chaos behind them, so they had to just work that all.
So let me triple check on the allocations and what is the most recently documented thing that we had to provide all this stuff to, NBTC for the
Okay,
commuter choice grant to show that the money is all there in the total dollar amounts.
yeah, we had official resolutions from GWRC that listed the money that was given for the swap.
So are there any other questions on Brooke? I mean, bottom line in all this is that we feel comfortable, especially if we're awarded the commuter choice funding for the Leland project, that both of these projects, Brooke and Leland, will be able to move forward in this decade. That will provide additional capacity, person throughput, and just a better customer experience, because now you can open all the doors on the train and spread people out, and they're not, crammed up in 5 of the 8 available. So
They're good projects. I'm just amused. It's something we deal with as planners all the time, but you know that phrase that we can do it this decade. It's effectively a station platform and some stairs. We'll try to do it this decade. I was like, amuses me.
show us some sources of funding where we could go out and build it tomorrow, and I'm sure our chief engineer will be right there with.
GWRC money is allocated in prior years, so it's already available. There's no. Kate, we were just talking about the other 599. This meeting hasn't formally started yet.
We actually did.
Well, we did start at 9.
Benefit of like those who've just come in, so the meeting was supposed to be at 9, but like some of the announcements it didn't go out, so what we started was this VRE presentation in Stafford, since Stafford was here, and we could be productive, and
there's no,
we have a long agenda. We don't want to go to like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so we wanted to kind of start.
and there's no
rolling.
decision required on this
Yeah.
matter. But I think we should probably, I was just grabbing some documents for Matthew, so did you do a proper roll call?
Yeah, we have a quorum. We did a roll call.
Okay.
We haven't done any action items here, and we haven't done the public involvement. But I guess just to wrap this up, a couple things. So, will FAMPO eventually need to take some action on this, or is this just more FYI?
I don't think that there's any action that Tampo needs to take.
Other than potential swap, but that would be GWRC
GWRC.
and the CMAX swap.
That's not sample, yeah.
But just like on the project and just the overall change, like FAMPO does.
I don't believe so.
Kate, while you,
Be a tip change eventually.
yes, while you're here,
Yes.
just a question, does the TAC or FAMPO policy committee need to send a renewed request to swap the CMAC, or is the original request okay in terms of consideration?
So I think
I know it's all up to discussion and the board and all that sort of stuff.
what we had landed is the swap would not necessarily happen in real time. So the university board would make the action to allocate additional BAMPO funding to it, which would mean then when BAMPO goes through their next round of CMAC allocations, they would be able to move that money. You wouldn't have to do it immediately after.
But the allocation of the van pool money to the VRE project, that,
The university.
no, I know, I'm just asking if you want us to put in a new request from FAMPO, or is there a previous request acceptable?
I think the way we'll approach it is to just say we have this money available. This is an existing project with funds on it. Do you want to take an action to allocate more funds to it? So it already has funds on it, so it's not like a new project. It would just be increasing.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
So I was just gonna throw this out just, for discussion of, FAMPO University staff. If we could work this out, it might be possible to maybe give some additional CMAC funding to GW Ride Connect. Something to consider, but maybe it could move just more quickly than some of the other allocations for university.
We also don't have a specific funding source yet for doing the LRTP.
Okay,
And we need, for
that's
example,
another
a
option.
consultant to do the,
Scenario.
no, well, yes, that's nice, but
Can you use CMAC for that?
the,
It had to be swapped back to PJ.
the, well, the, kind of the operational report of the roadways, I forget what the hell it's called, sorry, my mind's just gone blank, but
The
we
CMS,
can't do it
congestion
internally.
management system?
No,
Yeah.
Running the line.
it's one of the chapters in the LRTP, which have to be done by a consultant because we don't have the internal
Okay.
skills to run that software and produce that report. Systems performance report, I think it's called.
Okay.
We farmed that out to an expert on roadways to do, and that you have to pay them, and there are little things like that for the,
Is that like with the performance-based planning requirements at the Fed side?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And because we're supposed to complete the LRTP by March 2027, we have to, and it takes a year to do the whole darn thing, so that we have to start in, let's say, March 2026, which is gonna be on us before we blink. So that's why
Yeah.
I'm just reminding of that particular need.
Okay. So for the benefit of everyone who just came in, we started like the meeting basically even with the quorum at like 9:05. Try to get things going since we have like a big agenda today. But I would like to go back and can we redo the roll call
Yes,
just since we have a
please.
lot more people here, and then we'll just go kind of through the meeting from just skipping 7B, which we covered.
Just apologies, Fampo staff made an error. We, on the agenda, put the meeting starting at 9, and on the website, we put the meeting starting at 9, but the email, the cover email, unfortunately said 9:30, so that was an error on our part. So we gave you 2 starting times, so apologies, it's on us.
Okay, Paul Agnello,
Here,
Jamie Jackson,
I'm on my way.
all right, Matthew Lahane,
Here.
Bassam Amin,
Here.
Kathy Coffey. Here. Adam Derrick,
Here.
Melody Fowler, Matthew Bewley. Here. Kate Gibson. Here. Christine Hefner, Leon Hughes, Daniel Koenig. Linda Lusset in place of. Okay. Stephen Minor, Nick Ruiz.
Here.
Bob Schneider.
Here.
Rodney White.
Here.
Oh, mine, okay,
Oh,
perfect.
go ahead.
All right, and we still have a quorum.
great.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll just take a quick opportunity to introduce Josh Crown. Josh has joined the city of Fredericksburg as our new principal planner. So you'll see his face here.
Welcome.
And may take a more formal role here in the near future.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome to Josh, isn't it?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so that brings us to the agenda. The one thing we've done is we've covered 7B. My proposal is to run down through the rest of the agenda as it's currently listed. Does anyone have any concerns with that?
I just think when we get to 7B, anybody who arrived late, I think Nick should just ask, are there any additional questions? Probably won't be, but
Okay,
to give them a chance so that they
Do you
don't.
want me to do 7A now or?
No, I think
we're gonna
we've
run
first
through
got
the
to
thing
do
to
the
get to 7A.
Oh, okay.
approval of the agenda, the public comment, the blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda with what?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Passes. We are down to the public comment. Would any members of the public wish to speak? Okay. Hearing none, we will forge on. To the consent. So for the consent agenda, we just have the meeting minutes. From our last meeting, did anyone have any comments on the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve? Is
Much to approve.
there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, so that brings us to the tip amendments and modification, 6A, resolution 526. I'll turn it over to the info staff.
John? Oh, there he is.
Morning, everybody. This amendment is going to be amending the funding for the Fredericksburg Go fiber optic and project. What they're doing is rolling previous fundings up forward with the cost increase that's catching the amendment qualification. So this is a pretty big IT kind of upgrade for them. Did Fredericksburg Go have anything else that they wish to add to this?
Not at this time.
I think just the thing to do, Mr. Chairman, because the policy committee often asks, does everybody understand the write-up there under description, and are you happy with it? Because the policy committee is gonna probably ask as well. So now's the chance to actually, if there's an error, to spot the error, if there's any question, to answer the question, so that by the time we send it to the policy committee, it's not a sort of unknown quantity.
Can you actually make it a little bit bigger? Funding types? So, okay, so this is a GWC like 5339 project, which soon GWC already approved, right?
Okay,
It's actually a mixture of funding, so the
Okay.
621 is GWRC 5307, and then, there is 240, another 5307 source, but yes, it's all 5307.
Okay,
so if we were to say to the policy committee that the moving of these funds has already been approved by GWRC board, that would be true?
Yes, yes, and actually you can see in the program note, it says remove 621 from FY '24. So basically we're moving that amount to FY '25 and then adding the additional amount. So the GWRC portion has been in the tip for a long time.
Yes.
And has been approved for a long time. So now it's just moving it to the current fiscal year, and adding some additional funding so that they can go ahead and, amend their grant application or FTA.
And the additional is that 215 in local funding.
No, that's the local match.
What is the additional?
Um,
Melody,
The federal went from 621 to 861. There's an additional 240,000 federal and then the match increase.
Melody or Jamie, has that additional federal money already been approved by the federal authorities?
So
I
the money,
actually think that amount is already in the federal grant. Now we're adding the 621.
The additional money on this project from the federal government, is that already approved in the federal grant?
so Kate said it correctly. It's been put into the federal grant by PRTC.
Okay, great, thank you. That answers, so they always look at us as FAMPO staff to explain projects that have nothing, very little to do with FAMPO, and then we have to try and answer the question on the fly in the middle of the policy committee meeting.
so if there are no further questions or discussion, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. So that brings us down to 7A, the VRE Master Agreement Survey with Mr. Nick Lewis.
So, going to give a brief presentation on our master agreement survey. If you want to move to the next slide, agenda here, why, how, who, and what. That's really what we're going to talk about. This should take about 10 to 12 minutes. Moving on to the next slide. The next slide, please. Yep. So in the spirit of continual improvement, there is one error on this slide, and that's the little tacked on calendar that we actually did our master agreement survey in October this year, not November. But basically, why do we do an annual survey? Virginia or VRE's master agreement spells out that annually we have to perform a survey to reallocate the required subsidy payments from the jurisdictions that are members of VRE. So there are 9 contributing jurisdictions to the system. 2 of the 9 contribute in a slightly different way than the other 7. I'll talk about that in a second. There's no formal way today for us to perform a daily or weekly continual update and monitoring of VRE's riders' home jurisdictions. And so the best way to do it is during a period of relatively high ridership in the mid-fall, when there are not a lot of or any federal holidays. We conduct a one-day AM survey of as many passengers as we can get, and we've typically had a pretty good response rate in the past, between 60 and 70% of riders. It's a paper survey. It's on people's seats in the morning. They come in, they get a tiny little pencil, and they fill out the survey. It's a Scantron type of survey and hand it back to us. We do that on all our morning AM and bound trains. And the reason why is because per the master agreement that governs how VRE operates, the jurisdictional funding, the jurisdictional subsidy is always the last dollar of operating and capital funding for the budget. So we build our budget out, we take all the other money that we can expect in that fiscal year, and we say, well, what's the shortfall? We take the expected ridership and therefore the expected fare revenue. We identify the gap, and in a normal year when there's not still federal pandemic relief funding transit, we would say, okay, what is the operating gap, and that gap gets filled by the jurisdictions by the subsidy. In addition, because we do a bigger spring customer opinion survey, this gives us another data point in the same year to collect some limited demographic data, things like zip codes, home locations, work locations, things like that. We collect some very basic demographic data on that survey. So there's value in that, but the primary function, if you only could ask 3 questions, is where did you get on, where did you get off, and what's your home jurisdiction? I mean, at its core, that's really what the master agreement survey is about. Moving on to the next slide here. So the results, a little convoluted, and I have a next slide that has more of a diagrammatic view. But as I mentioned before, we distribute the paper surveys on each AM train. As I said, the primary questions are those. We also do a complimentary station boarding count on that morning. And so thank you to all the jurisdictional partners that stand at the stations way early in the morning and count physical people getting on. And that's kind of a validation check of how many people we actually got on the trains at those facilities. And then once we collect all the data, we send it to our financial accounting team, and they will compute the proportional share of total subsidy per jurisdiction. And so once that proportionality is established, as I mentioned before, we then identify the need, which is that gap between available and expected cost, and we'll allocate the subsidy formulaically in that way. Before I move on, are there any questions about that process? Pretty straightforward. So moving on to the next slide here. This is essentially how it flows. So we start with the net subsidy need, the total dollar amount outstanding. The master agreement pulls the city of Alexandria and the county of Arlington out as separate lump sum payment contributors, and they're fixed amounts in the order of magnitude of a couple $100,000 each. They are their amount is grown by the same percentage increase of the average of the other 7 jurisdictions. So if, like in this past fiscal year, we had on average 8% increase in subsidy, Arlington and Alexandria's block amounts go up by 8%. Fairly equitable. So then we after we've broken those out, we've got the 7 remaining jurisdictions, and that's where the actual survey data comes in, because we're looking at the percent of total ridership. So you might be wondering, well, what about all those people from Caroline County or Richmond or whatever? So they're considered system riders, so they're non-member jurisdiction riders, and we typically see between 9 and 12% on a given year of folks that are coming from outside the VRE member jurisdictions riding the system. And they actually go, the revenues from their fares actually go to reduce the overall total subsidy need. So it basically is just an off the top. If we got $100,000, let's say we collect $1 million and 100,000 of that is non-jurisdiction riders, everybody else has to pay 900,000. So then we don't just stop at the percent of total ridership. We also look at the jurisdiction's fares that they were charged, because a customer getting on in Spotsylvania is contributing more dollars in a year to the system than a customer from, Franconia. So, you multiply the fares by the number of people, and you end up with the total subsidy per jurisdiction. So before I move on to the next slide showing the what, you know, if there's any questions on this formula, still pretty straightforward. Moving on to the next slide. So who pays by formula? It's the 7 jurisdictions listed there on the right. And Arlington and Alexandria are the off the top.
And Nick, with like the off the top for Arlington and Alexandria, like, is there a formula for that?
It's literally just, they started with a certain amount, that was like the original master agreement survey amount for those 2 jurisdictions. And their jurisdictional subsidy has grown percentage-wise by the average growth of all the other subsidies. So in this case, it was at 8% this year. It was 8% for Arlington and Alexandria. So you'd have to go all the way back to the beginning to see what they started at and see kind of where they ended. That has not changed since the master agreement survey started.
Okay.
Moving on to the next slide. So this is the meat here, the what. And this was presented, I believe I might have presented it, maybe not, a couple of months ago. But this is the FY26 recommended. You've certainly seen this. Obviously, all the districts have seen this. This year, Fairfax County bears the highest burden with 31% of the subsidy. But in this region, you've got Stafford, Spotsylvania, each about 2.8, 2.6 million. Fredericksburg at 680, and you know, Prince William County at 5. So.
Yes, Matthew.
The original recommended amount was slightly lower than the FY26 recommended here. Do you know why that change was from what was presented, say back in October, November, to what was adopted December?
Yeah, that's so typically because the total need, the last dollar need, the moving target, once we basically finish our budgeting process and have firm estimates that this is what we're going to spend in fiscal year 26. The resulting balance difference is 19.7 million, and then numbers shake out that way. So the percentages were established a couple months ago.
Yeah.
It's just what the total amount is, because we are bringing in CARES. It's not CARES funding anymore. It's the second one or the third one, ARPA. Yeah, from the federal.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The ones that went down, less contribution, is that because they have less riders?
No, less riders proportional to the total than they did before.
Okay, so the others went up more and they didn't go up so much, so therefore they pay a little less money.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next slide. So this is just the actual quantity of riders that were picked up in the master agreement survey. These are not the total riders that actually are riding. This is just in the master agreement survey, how many riders we picked up on that day. And like I said, it's typically about a 60 to 70% response. So you can see the changes. I mean, obviously in Fredericksburg, they're down about 3.2%, but Spotsylvania, I mean, the big winner here, I mean, 14% more riders this year than
A bigger bill to pay.
Yeah.
Spotsy's riders have grown, but I'm guessing that people from Caroline County are also getting on at Spotsy.
Well, no, this does not include the non-jurisdictional.
Oh, it doesn't include?
That's the spot.
Oh, well, well done. Growing
Yeah.
transit ridership.
So, I mean, a lot more housing, every year, more housing, more people, so that's how things go.
Yeah, I'll just say that like our board members are hoping that we go to 15% maybe next year, so we can actually have 2 BRE board positions instead of
board,
1, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's,
Under the cusp.
that is what you get. Well, I guess one of the plus sides, you pay more, but you do get more representation for the allocation.
Good.
So moving on to, I believe this is the penultimate slide, just to give you a sense for what the subsidy was in real dollars. In each of these years, you can see that in fiscal year 2022, we have an asterisk here because in that year, the subsidy, the operations board agreed to cut the subsidy a considerable amount to 4.7 million in a recognition that locality budgets were still uncertain given the effects of the pandemic and that. You have to remember that fiscal year 22 is really calendar year 21, so or late 2020. So things were pretty raw back then. And we are just now getting to the point where we are growing out in real dollars from the pre-pandemic subsidy level of 17. So just want to put all this in perspective that while there was a lot of conversation at the board level about, about the increase in subsidies, we're still actually below in nominal dollars, accounting for inflation.
Is that year-on-year change percentage correct for 2023? Because when you look at the dollar change,
It's,
you look at the percentage change,
well, look,
percentage seems a bit.
it's 47.5 million to 13.5. I'm taking the what was actually paid, which was the 4.7 million. So the difference between what was paid in 2020,
Oh,
you see what I mean?
because it's a percentage of the previous increase,
That's correct.
not a percentage of the total.
Yeah, because they didn't pay 18.3 million in 2020.
Okay,
They paid 4.
never mind.
But that was what was in the budget, like the actual published. So that's just give you a little history here, and then the final slide for you all. I just want to, make everyone understand that where the jurisdictional contributions fit in with the overall sources of VRA operating funding, or excuse me, the total VRA funding operating and capital is about 11%. So basically, it's a 1 in 10 leverage, right? So for every dollar that the jurisdictions are putting in, they're getting almost $10 in revenue. Fairly good value. If I could find an investment that gave me 10 times my return, I would definitely be doing it. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or we can move on.
Are there any questions for Nick and Beery? Thank you, Nick. You gave a great presentation.
Thanks.
So we're going to forge ahead to 7C, which is resolution 2527, directing public comment period for modification, the 25th CP. Turned over to Miss Becky Golden.
There you go. Real quickly, we've seen before the goals and objectives and the update to the the ride sharing and van pool. Privately provided. And I've just on these 3 or 4 slides summarize the changes. Go ahead and just scroll through them. The new thing, Appendix C, we've updated the active transportation plan with just hold right here with the changes. Strike through version of each of them in your agenda packet, and the request is to open the public comment period for these 3 modifications. Current LRTP.
I'll make a motion to approve the opening of public comments.
Is there a second? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes.
If you do see any errors, you have the whole 30-day public comment period to reach out to us and say, hey, we found an error or there's something missing. That's the point of public comment anyway, is to see if there's anything that's amiss. So before we adopt it, Mr. Chair, next post public comment period meeting, you can then give us any input. So we're quite happy for you to say, hey, you made an error here. Let us know.
Okay. So this brings us to our favorite topic, smart scale.
One of our 2 favorite topics.
I wrote one of our 2 favorite topics, but this is a very important one. So turn over to Miss Curie Eads.
Yeah, favorite topic. So. Scale around 6. That's preliminary results from the staff. We'll talk about this today.
And then one thing I would ask if everyone could hold their comments to the end so Carrie can go through her presentation.
So Fanshawe GWRC had 1 project funded and there were 4 total in the entire district. So what happened? As we were talking about in the months running up to this, there were big scoring changes. Category B, which is the category we're in, the factor weighting changed. Congestion was raised to 25% from 15%. Acceptability changed to 25 from 20, and that hurt us, of course, because our commuters travel farther than 45 minutes that they measure. Strict HPP funding eligibility definition, we had fun with that. Those parameters were never agreed upon between us and OIT all the way up to the end. As you know, standalone bike ped and other small projects were no longer eligible for HPP. They had a completely new way of measuring economic development, which was completely different than they'd done before. It was more difficult for us to score points, and there was a narrower site eligibility, and the conversion of land use from a factor to merely a multiplier. So this factor had supported our transportation land use patterns that were efficient, what we consider good planning, and this had been intrinsic to our success in the past.
Staying on, sorry, just one ad hominem from me as a representative here of Vampo. Sorry, Kerry.
You're fine.
Vampo has decided to send a letter to the CTB and to OIP to say that we feel concerned that we were not given an opportunity to comment on this technical guide, and substantial changes were made which affect us, and that we would like in future to see the technical guide completed earlier, and for us to be given 30 days to make comment as MPOs on the technical guide that affects us so much, because that wasn't done this round. It was foisted on us at a very last minute decision. So Vampo is writing a letter representing all of the MPOs in Virginia.
Next slide. What else? There were big funding changes. That removal of the funding step 2 was a big deal. That had allocated HPP on a district-wide basis that had funded smaller projects for MPOs and PDCs and transit. Now all HPP funds are statewide competition. There was a significant emphasis on local match. During their meetings, CTB repeatedly stressed local funding on applications. They said rewarding skin in the game. And HPP eligibility rules repeatedly encouraged very large projects, but there was 38% less funding than there had been for round 5. This was something we didn't know about. Next. So compared to prior rounds, you can see round 6 there at the end. There's a big difference. So look at the funded, about 4 lines down. All the prior rounds, 163, 147, 154, 167, 164, and 53. There were only 53 funded, recommended for funding applications this round. And then at the bottom, the value of funding projects was supported, much less. And then the second to the bottom, this is the second to lowest amount of money available for any of the rounds. So not a pretty picture.
That's just so crazy that we've dropped the funding by, in some years half, in other years even more.
The other thing I'll just add in there is that if you factor in the increase of costs of all of the projects with inflation, it just makes it worse.
So I wanted to hold the questions to the end, just to let Carrie
Sure.
get through her presentation, because
Next slide.
do you want to have an extended discussion on this?
Okay, so the funding distribution for round 6, you can see at the end there, the HPP available was 384.7 million, DGP 694.6 million, and you can see the distribution across the districts. Now, this may have to be revised depending on the full financial impact of the emergency response. The spending in the coming months will determine if a revision is necessary, so this may change. Next slide. All right, so here is the staff recommended funding scenario. We'll start there by Richmond. They got a lot of money. Total allocation for Richmond, 338.5 million out of the total. Let's see, what's our cut? 90 million. You can see the spread across there. Some folks didn't get any of the HPP at all. Fully 4 of the 9 districts got none whatsoever. So least we didn't get none. That's unprecedented though, I believe. As far as I know. Slide. Yes.
Oh, no.
Oh, wait, we're holding.
Yeah, we're holding.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so, staff recommended scenario for Fredericksburg, 90 million total requested, smart scale funds, average project cost this time around, 25.5 million. Hold on to that, that's interesting. The top funded project in the state, the highest scored project in the state was in Caroline from the US 1 project pipeline study, Page and Mary intersection project. That's a safety project. It scored sky high in safety. Next scoring project was also for Caroline. Those are DGP, not HPP. No local match project, no local match funding, but they're very small projects. US 1 South Point Parkway intersection, also funded by DGP, but they were eligible for HPP. They applied for both. About to put 11 million local match funding on that project. So we got one HPP project, and it was small, Route 3 pipeline. No local match, but again, a small project. Now that project, let's see, was 6.43 was our score on that project. And the lowest HPP funded score project was 4.0. So it's kind of low. It's lower than the average for an HPP project across the state. It's very much on the lowest side. So something to think about there. Our next highest HPP project was 2.2. So we kind of didn't have a chance on that. Next slide. Okay, so this is round 5, just a thought, just something to compare. But what I want you to pay attention to here was, these were mostly small. The previous slide, the average project was 25.5 million. The average cost last round was 12.8 million. So about half the size of the current round. And we won approximately 116.5 million. This time, approximately 90 million. Not a huge difference overall. The difference is in the HPP. We got 50 million HPP last time and 16 million HPP this time. So that's where the big difference is. Next slide. Richmond, on the other hand, they were the big winner. So red is CVT RTA funds. Orange is other local match. Of the statewide 384.7 million HPP funding, they got 66.5% of it, while nearly half the districts got 0. They allocated 63.4 million of their own local match, received 338 million state funding. Of the total local match, 50 million was RTA funding. So they bought the pot. Next slide. Local match matters unless you have a small, very strong project. It's all in the math. You have your project score, the first little arrow, and your score divided by your dollar request, second arrow. And that gives you your final score. The project benefit score divided by the dollar amount requested gives you your final score, and that gives you your rank. And that makes a huge difference. The yellow is DGP, the blue is HPP. They meant it when they said skin in the game. This makes the difference. Then, next slide. So recommended project scorecards, the next few slides, we can gloss over them, or we can spend some time on them. You can review them in your pack, they're there. They are also online on the VDOT Smart Scale website. All of the scorecards. I'm going to be spending some time analyzing all of them and seeing what happens.
So just to remind ourselves, Caroline is in type D, not in type
Oh,
B.
yes, that's another point to make. For Fredericksburg, yes, Caroline is type D. They have different factor weights. Safety is a big deal for them. We are type B. We are directly competing with Richmond. Caroline is not. So yeah, safety is 40% of the score in area type D. Next slide. So Route 3, area C. And so they were ranked 40 of 270 statewide. And for HPP, the highest, the lowest rank was 75, was for funded projects. So our next project for HPP was 105 rank. No, I'm sorry, 138 rank. So our HPP projects just really didn't score well. Slide. So South Point Parkway. Slide. This is just our HPP funding success over the last several rounds, the amounts of money that we made. It's a comparison. So summary, the staff recommended summary is subject to change. Historically, not much, but it can. Yeah, you can click on your packets to look at those scorecards. We were cautioned about the importance of significant local match funds, and that was reflected in the results. We will need to address this issue. We are category B and in direct competition with well-funded districts. Our highest scoring project, Route 3 pipeline at 10.81 is lower than the average benefit score for an HPP project. 1770 was the average benefit score. So it's not all about match, it's about the scoring rubric and our projects. Next slide. I could talk for another half hour about this, but there's more analysis to be done. I will be taking a look at these things. Scores may shift and we will report back next month what we find out. And in May, we'll get our draft consensus scenario.
Thank you, Carrie. So I know there's a lot to unpack with this. I just want to go around the table. I'll start with the city. Would you like to make any comments?
Nope,
Really? Okay.
not right now. I don't have any comments. Do you have any? Mike?
No, Gary, you did a
Okay.
good job explaining things that have changed and obviously we could.
Okay. Viri?
Is it still the case, based on what I'm seeing, that some of the bike ped or multimodal projects still did receive a fairly high score relative to the others? I saw a couple that on one of the beginning slides that seemed to be at the top of the
So
overall smart scale score.
I still need to look. I still need to analyze the scorecards. I didn't have a lot of time between the
Okay.
results coming out
Yeah.
and now. But it definitely did hurt things not having the land use as a factor.
Okay. For all projects, not just multimodal.
It hurt small projects and multimodal projects the most.
You can see in the city of Fredericksburg.
Oh,
that hurt.
They're-
Yeah, I can imagine.
Their
Oh,
route.
that's my comment.
Yeah. Yeah, their route 3 crossover for the VCR trail got scored like 0.3.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, what was the reason for the overall reduction in like total available funding, HPP and district grant? Was it?
The secretary answered that question in the CTB meeting. In his opinion, he said that for the previous round, they effectively borrowed money from this round so that he could get more projects
Fully funded.
because they were running into inflation problems, and he, before the inflation has an even bigger impact this round, wanted to get those projects into construction, so he borrowed money from this round. So he suggested that the actual reality was that probably of the 400 million, or whatever it was, less this round, that half of it went to last round and half of it was a result of a drop in the net funding they received. I don't know whether that's because the gas tax money was less than normal or some other factor, but that's what he said in the meeting.
Before we go to Stafford, Nick, was there anything else you wanted to say? Okay. Stafford.
Yeah, it's on slide 18 in the CTV presentation for the 6-year plan. For round 4, there was supplemental fuel tax revenue at nearly 400 million, and they used funding from FY21 through FY24. I think in round 3 or round 4, they increased fuel tax to help cover smart scale funding, or help be part of the smart scale program. So they had to backdate some of the money starting from. In round 5, they had money from FY25 through FY29. 666 million. In round 6, they only had money for 2 years, FY30 and FY31,
Okay,
estimated at 243.
it's a policy situation, it's not a,
Yes.
there's less money coming in necessarily from the various sources of the CRO.
Yeah, I think if you look back towards round 1, 2, round 3, and then this round, you'll see a trend that's still going up.
Of what?
Money.
Well, the money allocated is not going up.
That was supplemental money that ran out.
Yeah, round 4 and round 5 was just supplemental, that's why there's one.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
Yeah.
You'd like to say?
I guess I just had, a question for Carrie. If, for instance, South Point Parkway, it scored 5.4 or something.
Yeah, it's supplemental.
I guess
Yeah.
one
Go ahead.
thing we'll have to keep in mind as we move forward is what projects are under HPP and DGP. Because the South Point was under just HPP and under a FAMPO Introducee application, it would have received funding under HPP, and
Yes.
there would be more funding in DGP for other localities to receive funding.
I think that as a region, we need to get together and collaborate much tighter and make sure that we all are working together and pushing the same way so that we can all be more successful. Next round.
Can you actually go back to, there was a slide just showing the funding for the various rounds, like 1 through 6. That one, yes. Yeah, that one, FYI. Yep. So, I think we have a major problem. I mean, certainly the fact that the funding is down statewide is, discouraging. And I'll say, like, I would encourage everyone to go back and listen to the Secretary's presentation, which was in Smart Scale as well as the presentation right before Smart Scale. But it painted kind of a bleak picture with funding. And I'll say, if things remained unchanged, that for the next round of Smart Scale, I don't see a huge increase in funding coming. Maybe it goes from 1 billion to 1.1 billion, but like Kathy said, with inflation on the projects, basically that will get eaten up pretty quick. And I'll say, like, when you look at all the rounds, I think this round was the most like round 3 with the level of funding. And I would say if you adjust for inflation, it probably was the lowest amount of funding available for any round. So that's troubling. The other issue, which is I think our biggest problem, is just with changes with Smart School, as some have already said, our projects just don't score very well. I would say just with like round 3, that project that was selected, we expected that would kind of like, be one of the highest scores like in the state, similar to the Caroline projects, and it made it, but like Carrie said, it wasn't particularly high, and that's the most congested part of round 3, just west of the mall. And it wasn't that expensive of a project. If a project like that, kind of is barely squeaking in basically to get selected in Smart Scale, that doesn't bode very well for like other projects like Route 1, Route 208, other kind of major, 610, other major routes in the region. And I think we really need to come together and maybe work with AMPO too, to the extent we can, and try to basically change the methodology for round 7, because if this stays the way it is, I don't see our region doing very well. I'll say, just to address the point that Matthew made, and I'll say it's very hard basically to know, like, beforehand what would be the ideal thing to do. And as Carrie said, the rules were changing, and it really did not get finalized, I think, until the end of February.
Did not.
And it was interesting, like the state actually did go out with a public comment period on the Smart Scale, which I think it was like from about Halloween, into early December. They actually did do that. What was unforeseen was that then they would do a bunch of major changes after that. So kind of the public comment was done more at a interim kind of point. In terms of just like the strategy we pursued, I think in the absence of good information, we did the best that we could. I mean, we had no idea what the rules were going to be. And by the time the rules came out, like, it was too late to change anything. We actually, I think, compared to any other round, we actually started the process, I think, much earlier, but the problem is we didn't know what the rules were. And without knowing that, it was kind of hard. The other issue we had is we had a lot of projects that were based on these pipeline and star studies, and I mean, they're good studies. I'm not faulting the state, just for things, but it was hard just from an applicant standpoint that the results of those studies were literally coming out sometimes like days or just hours before the deadline for the smart scale, and we were having to make kind of split-second decisions on what the scope of the project should be and just how much leverage funding should be on the projects. I mean, if those studies had just even been available like a month or two earlier, I think we could have made more decisions. But yes.
Just one comment from me. I mean, I think all of us realize that each of Carrie's points we could add to that. There's a lot there. Have you all thought about the impact of removing step 2?
Step 3.
Step two. Step 2 was removed.
Oh, is step 2 the one where they do the runner-up?
Step 2 is the one where they fund you before they look at your local match. So step 3, which is still there, now your local match is a big deal. Step 2, is prior to looking at the match.
Step 2 is where they take HPP funding and apply it.
Top district grant runner-up.
And so what the effect of that is that it then means that the local match on step 3 projects, which is HPP now,
Right.
becomes much more important. But because of what happened with the match, the total ask after you subtracted the match, so badly affecting your score, it now means that if you have a project, except for the low dollar value projects, right, that there wasn't much impact. But it now means that if you have a project that's more than, and we get back to that number that we've got to work out, like, I don't know, somewhere around 20 million or 18 million.
million.
I don't know what the number is.
10.
We'll calculate that. But when you get over that number, you have to put in something like 40% local match to get anywhere.
If you do, let's look at Garrisonville, right?
Yeah.
That's an important project. We can put it 3 times and they put a huge chunk of local match on it.
So there are two factors: the score, where there's some things like corridor statewide significance that have an impact, and all those other things.
Doesn't impact on the score.
There's a column in the scoring rubric for COSS.
Right. It
That's
doesn't
just a
impact the
requirement.
score.
It doesn't impact the score.
So the point is that all those factors that affect the initial score matter, right? And they've changed which ones impact our projects. The second thing that matters is what you then divide that number by, which is the total value of the project. So the minute you get over a certain dollar value, you have to put in a huge amount of match. And if you don't put in a vast amount of match, your project won't stand a chance. There's no point even submitting it.
Unless it's an extraordinarily strong project.
So could we actually look at, like, it's in the packet, there's like a spreadsheet which has like the results from WIPY for the entire state.
Yeah, you can
It's
pull it
PDF.
up later.
I just want to make a couple points on like just scores and match. And I'll say, like, having more local match certainly does help. When you look at the results, I think the more important issue is the scores.
Yeah.
The strong
And,
project.
and I guess if you go to Northern Virginia first, so Northern Virginia had some projects that had a huge amount of funding and that were not selected. If we can try to find Nova.
This,
Maybe-
yeah, some of those are Nova, like Northern Virginia Transportation Authority.
Yes, if it's
Fairfax.
possible to make it a little bit bigger to see like what the actual like leverage funding is.
Those yellows in the middle.
Yeah, these would be ones that were not selected that were white. They had some very large ones, which
No, go back to where you
Yeah,
were.
go where you.
this is Northern Virginia.
There, northern. See the word northern there? Just stop there.
Yeah.
There was one I was shocked. It was like had just a huge amount of leverage funding on it. And it was not selected.
Well, there's one there that costs 46.9 and they're only asking for 14.5.
14. And it didn't get selected.
Well, there were some bigger ones down the list. Like I can't read it too well from this distance.
A good example in Richmond District was short path improvements. Had-
Frontier Drive Extension, just look at that project there. Frontier Drive extension. The cost was 267 and they only asked for 71.
That's it, yeah, that one.
So the rest would have been all match.
Yeah, and its score is 0.78.
So it's almost 200 million match and it fails.
So one of the interesting things, like during the actual smart scale presentation at the CTP, and I'll say, if you haven't listened to that, I encourage everyone to get back and watch that. But the state staff were lamenting the fact that there wasn't more like leverage funding on the projects. Nova, there were a lot of projects that had a huge amount of leverage funding on, but they just scored really low.
Actually, there are not a lot of individual projects that have got a lot of match. There are a small number of projects with a large amount of match. So they have huge match on about 4 or 5 projects out of like that whole long list you can see there.
So then look at Richmond. Yes, there were some projects that had like local match on them. But in terms of like, if you look at Richmond and you just look at like, what projects were selected because of the leverage funding, most of them would have been selected even if they had no leverage funding on them. And I was shocked with like the Tri-Cities area, they're not in the RTA. They had some significant projects that were selected with little to no leverage funding on. So I think we should dig into like the scoring for Richmond and figure out like, what did they do, or like why did their project score so well relative to us?
Correct.
Given that we're both in category B.
Yeah, 2 comments on that. One, not Richmond specifically, but you look at Culpeper and the projects that they got scored well, a couple of roundabout projects are at the top. And if you go into VDOT's crash database and you calculate the EPDO value of those, it's astronomical. There's fatal accidents and severe injury accidents. I could not find any intersections in Stafford County that would be able to be a roundabout in that had anywhere near that high crash incidents, safety or fatal
Well,
accidents.
the
So,
highest project in the whole game was a safety project.
right, so it's very difficult. This is a good thing.
The smart scale is a safety program now.
In part, well, they get 40% of their score from safety, so in some ways, it's difficult to beat because we don't have as many safety issues as some of the other jurisdictions, say Culpeper does. One other thing I'll mention, just Richmond specifically, going back through the data available for round 5, their transit scores, they did really well on projects that had a bus stop with higher ridership. Their accessibility scores and under land use scores and all that. Under accessibility, transit is an important piece and we don't have that high transit ridership. So that'll be something that, anything we can do to help increase transit ridership on any areas where there's a project we're looking at is going to be very important. Looking at some of the Richmond projects that scored well in round 5 through their applications, so I was pulling the ridership data, and they had hundreds, if not thousands of people a day or over a month or 3-month period. There's like nowhere even close to that for any transit stops in Stafford County. So we can't even compete on that level. They're getting really good scores just because of things like that.
So the impact of switching those buckets, the score in each of those buckets, right? Congestion, safety, all that, favored Richmond hugely and disadvantaged us hugely because we're in the same category as them.
And if I may, if you look back, I'm talking about even just with round 5, before they switched, this was still an issue. Richmond, round 5 and round 6, even round 5, they had the top scoring projects just by benefit. Doesn't matter on the score, just total benefit. So they have higher density, better transit ridership issues than us, maybe, but.
And what do you think screwed the Garrisonville Road project? Because its score didn't drop much.
Money.
So that was the leverage funding on, so Garrisonville Road was wrecked by the leverage funding.
Garrisonville Road was, the leverage funding did not change dramatically. It went up by a few $1 million because we fully funded it through, or got fully funded through revenue sharing. We got a 10 million rev share. And we had 21.5 in local. What screwed Garrisonville was the increase in cost from 76 million to 104. We changed the project scope to be a little short of a project, but its benefit was still relatively the same because we changed the actual what's actually on the project in the wide, just changed the section. So the cost went up by $25 million.
So those projects which are bigger and which are needed, I mean, I don't think there's anybody here who would put their hand up and say that our 3 most congested roads do not need improvement, and that's Route 3, Garrisonville, and US 17. Those are our 3 worst. I don't think anybody here, or maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt anybody here would say, no, that we don't need that. I mean, those are our three worst non-I-95 congestion roads. And because the cost to fix them is so high, they're never going to get funded if this current score system remains. They will never get funded. But there is one, which is the Route 3 one that did get funded. And when you look at that, the cost was so small because the project was so small. If you want to make, and I don't personally think that it's going to make a huge impact on the congestion on that road. It will improve safety for people crossing, and it'll improve turning movements and that kind of thing, but it's not going to be a big bang improvement to congestion. So the really congested problems, the one that got funded in Spotsylvania got the highest congestion score of all the projects submitted this round in the entire state. So unless you're at that level of congestion, how are you ever going to get those other ones funded? How are you going to get 17 and Garrisonville funded in future? I don't know.
Well, I'll say that we had another Route 3 widening project that was not funded, and Stafford had the Route 17 project that was not funded. And
Correct.
those are both pretty congested. And when you look at the scores, like for Fredericksburg District, I mean, they didn't score particularly high, and so with the scores like for this round, if you did not get over about a 2.5, I mean, you can pretty much forget ever getting funded in the future unless the scoring system changes, or you want to just put a huge amount of leverage funding on it, where you're putting like 70% leverage funding on it.
Correct.
It's not encouraging at all.
That's exactly the
Yeah.
summary of where we
Right.
are now. That one sentence you just gave right now. It's like, unless you get a initial score that is very high, you're going to have to put 70% leverage funding if you're asking for more than whatever that number is, 10 million or something. There's widening those roads, so it's never going to get funded in smart code.
Matthew,
One thing I did want to mention just on the point about Route 3 and Route 17, they both scored okay. The only thing that, I guess the silver lining on 17 was the tons of goods impacted, the freight traffic. It scored pretty well under economic development because of the freight traffic on the road.
But still
So
don't
that's
get.
like- correct. It has a chance in the future with some leverage funding though. But in some minor. But just one thing to keep in mind, looking at the roads that have most freight traffic, those can significantly help that fund.
I also think that we should be digging into how they calculate the congestion metric for those roads like 17 and Garrisonville Road. Particularly Garrisonville Road, I think is a big black box, and they rely on certain INRIX reports that don't include, for example, Garrisonville Road.
That doesn't affect the scoring, that
No?
just affected what it was eligible for. So it doesn't show in V-Trans, it doesn't show as having a congestion need because of that, but its score wasn't based off of the INRIX data. Right?
So the congestion need is not calculated based on VTrans needs?
Correct. It's just how it becomes
So
eligible.
then we have no idea how they calculate the congestion metric.
They use, according to their technical guidance, they use a modified CapEx tool, which is an FHWA tool to calculate capacity at the intersection. And then they also use a couple other equations for different roadway segments, and they use the regional trouble in. So that's why we had to get the policy committee to approve the trouble in model by a certain time frame, so they can use it for the transform scope.
Did they?
Yeah.
Did they use the new one?
I mean, it hasn't the resolution.
I think removing funding step 2 was the biggest problem. It is holding less democratic and funded fewer projects, which is what I guess they wanted. But they told us to go for big projects, and then they didn't fund.
And there was no big money, so that was a misleading guidance from them. That was a huge problem. We only want big projects. We don't want your small bike paths. We don't want small projects. But oops, there's 400 million less money, or 38% less money. That's just criminal. Anyway.
so I just looked at the scoring for basically Route 17 in Stafford. That would have needed something like an additional 15 million to be selected this time.
Yeah.
Route 3 widening in Spotsylvania that was not selected would have needed an additional 14 million. So, I mean, like to Ian's point, what we've been talking about, even not encouraging.
No.
I guess what I would like to do is for us maybe to dig more into the scores, and I guess like has the spreadsheet come out which has like all the details?
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
Yeah,
that is it, okay.
looking at it, it's
Okay.
just gonna take time.
Yeah, maybe we can talk more next month. I guess, would VDOT like to make any comments?
I mean, I think you guys kind of hit on the same things. I'm looking forward at the next one, they're already looking at the next rounds of pipeline, so that should help with some of the timing that I think was a frustration for everybody. I would think that even the consultants doing the pipelines were frustrated by it because we were all pressuring them to get the information to us sooner. I will say that the number of projects that we got is very similar to most of the other districts. I think Culpeper also got 4, Bristol got 3. So the fact that there are 4 projects within the district is pretty in line with what everybody else did. So, Richmond certainly did get lion's share of the HPP. And I think it's just a learning process to kind of keep up with that moving target. But there is just, to the points already made, there's just less money going around and projects cost more. So I think it's gonna be difficult to try to find that sweet spot to get funded, but I think these are all things that we'll have to think about with the new round of pipeline. And then any of the other star studies and other things being done to try to find projects that we think will hopefully score well.
Mr. Chair, 2 things we have to bear in mind is what happens if they change the methodology again? We could get a better deal. Don't have a lot of hope, but we could. Alternatively, if they don't change the methodology, we're going to have to learn to live with it next round if they don't. And then we're going to have to adjust the kinds of projects we put in, bearing in mind that threshold that still gets funding below a certain amount. And if a jurisdiction wants a project that costs more than that threshold, which in my mind is a very low threshold, you don't get much for that amount of money. You're going to then have to, as Paul said, put in something like 7% of the funding, which means you might want to pick one big project and put all your leverage funding just on that one big project to ensure that it scores well enough to get funded. And then the other ones, keep them as small projects, for example. That might be the approach. Every jurisdiction picks one big project, puts all their funding on the one big project, and the other projects we submit have to be then 10 or 12 million small dollar projects. If this methodology stays, it's going to have to be that kind of a combination, because otherwise we're going to continue to fail to get them approved, because effectively these new scoring metrics basically screw us relative to Richmond.
That's a good point. One last point that I'll make is, in looking at this, and I guess maybe I'd like some others to maybe look at this too. It seemed like in our district, our pipeline and STAR studies underperformed relative to the rest of the state. And that's concerning, because if that's the case going forward, that doesn't bode well for us either.
Why, I guess 3 of the projects out of the 4 were pipeline.
Right.
So 3/4 of the projects that were funded were pipeline studies. And again, other districts got a similar number of projects, so I don't know when you're saying.
Well, you look at the ones that underperform, like the Route 639 stars, the Route 208 pipeline, I think. Isn't the Route 1 Forston, one in Stafford wasn't?
It was the stars from
It was stars.
2019, 2020. I don't.
I mean, when you look at those projects, it wasn't that just that they weren't selected, it was that they didn't score well. And you would need like an overwhelming amount of leverage funding for them to score well.
And some of that, I think, is that, and we already have looked at any of the locations for the next round of pipeline or stars. But I think some of that too is that we need to be very strategic about where we are having studies done. So it may not be that there are a lot of locations that could use improvements. But not all of those improvements translate to good scores, as we've seen. So that's where, if we're looking to try to get, things that are gonna score well, that may be that we're looking for improvements in quarters that have certain, issues that we can try to really capitalize on those things that would score.
So that means a two-phase. The first phase is choosing locations for pipeline studies where we already know what the VTrans needs are and how those will score. And secondly, when the study kicks off, you've then got to remind yourself what you're looking for in the study that's going to actually get points. Because if it doesn't get points,
It's just gonna add cost.
it's just going to not help at all. It's going to, the jurisdiction might want to fund it themselves as a local revenue sharing project or something, but for smart scale, the only things that will score well on corridor X will be this and this. And if you don't do one of those two things, don't waste the energy on this study because it's not going to go in.
But this round up to the last minute.
We
just
didn't
trying to
know.
Decide,
Yeah, we didn't
does
know.
this count? Does it have to be the whole corridor? Does it have to have a bike lane thing for, it? It was. They weren't even setting their own parameters until the last minute.
And that's gonna be a major problem also going forward, how whatever is recommended in the study has to be included in the application. So we need to be very careful about the recommendation in the study. It cannot be a study that says, here's everything that should be done. It needs to be a study that says, okay, for smart scale, you do this. Don't listen to anything else.
And that needs to be all of the stakeholders in the room
Yeah.
on that same page, and I completely agree with that, because if there's a study that has the everything option, that's great, but if we can't fund it, what good does it do?
Yeah.
So I think it does need to be very focused. And then, on the pipeline studies, they give us a list of here are the, V-Trans priorities and, kind of where would you like to go with that? It does limit the flexibility.
One final comment. When will we hear the final list of pipeline studies for the next round that we're?
So I believe it's presented at CTV meeting this month. So
So I must just go look at the record or this coming month?
this coming month, so
Okay.
February, like this month. Yeah, so we have a list that I can find, but like I said, it should be in the next one, and we've talked to all the localities about those were.
You have not talked to us though.
Okay, and that, yeah.
So that keeps happening and starts to irritate me.
Well, and I apologize, we've, as you know, we do have a little bit of a staffing change, and so, I'm surprised that Cassie didn't send it over, but, yeah, we can take a look at that. So there have been things that we've been given a very short time frame to react to, and that was sent out right around the holidays, so, we're trying to get this all worked out.
It's just that happens every single round, Mr. Chairman. FAMPO doesn't get appraised of the studies. I get a letter saying, please sign here, we're doing the study. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, well, and this is not in any way against anyone, but localities don't necessarily get a say in the decision either.
No, no.
It's mostly a VDOT, and they're good studies, they give good benefits, but.
Yeah, I would concur with what Matthew said, and I'll just say, I wasn't aware that Penco hadn't been, this hadn't been discussed, but with regard to Spotsylvania, Route 17 is kind of the one project that's been mentioned. Not sure if it'll make the list, but that's the one that's been mentioned.
Mine road.
I did have one last question, and I realized this is water under the bridge here, but with the Caroline Pipeline Study Project, could that have qualified for HPP if it had been packaged together for one quarterly?
I believe it probably could. I could go back and confirm that, but, it was, as you know, each,
Right.
entity can choose to apply how they wish to. So,
I mean, that's an example, like if we have another example like that, like next round, if we can coordinate and that can get on like the GWC list, that would help just some of the district grant projects.
Yeah, we weren't really aware of it.
I think we're gonna have to have a little workshop.
Yeah.
Where we ask jurisdictions to tell us what projects they're putting on their local lists and what projects they want us to consider for the regional list. And then we do some discussion beforehand of, is this the best project for the HPP, or is this the best project for the district grant, or is this, should it be on both, and all that kind of thing, was, we don't actually know what the localities are gonna do, like, and sometimes localities only approach VDOT late in the game. I think of King George, for example, and so on. So I think we should chat kind of like offline what's going on, or maybe put together a little workshop so that we can sort of think through what the best option is to try and get the most for the whole region.
We don't have access to locality applications unless localities.
No. So, I mean, obviously, if a locality is not asking for any projects to be put on the regional list, then they must just use their local list to them. I mean, we wouldn't, for example, take a King George project, I don't think, and put it on our list if they've got 5 unused slots of their own, right? I think there'd have to be some give and take there.
Mr. Chair, may I one final comment? Just not related to actual smart share scoring or projects, just something I'd like to see us push for ORP to do for next round is for applications, the actual parts of the application to be able to be sent to other, say if I had doing an application on the locality side, I would like to be able to send it to Carrie to then use on the Jupiter C side. Because it's a big effort for FAMPO staff to put in all the information that localities send. It'd be nice if localities could just do it. Because what I did last year was I sent Carrie a Word document of all the information that she copy pasted in. I could have just put that in an application and could have said, okay, Carrie has access to this, she can pull this into Jupiter C. You don't have access between FAMPO to Jupiter C, between localities to that.
That is controlled by OIP.
Yes. So it's, if we do have any conversation with OIP, any opportunity to public comment, stuff like that, I think that's one comment that could be really helpful to us working together and sharing information. And when we get to July of 2026, I'm not sending Carrie a very long Word document with everything. Instead, I'm just saying, okay, Carrie, I'm sending you this application. She says, okay.
Yeah, we had to save this round a bunch of projects which OIP wanted to screen out, because particularly because localities made changes to their projects. And then OIP said, well, throwing this project out because it now no longer meets whatever requirements. Making changes very late in the game is very dangerous. We literally saved a bunch of your projects by working with VDOT and working with localities.
Off the highway and change.
Making literally changes on their laptops to applications because we were like 24 hours from deadline and people wanted changes that OIP refused to accept. Anyway.
Well, I would like to thank everyone for the comments. We're going to close the discussion on smart scale so we can go on to our other big topic, but great work, Carrie, and we'll talk more about this next month.
Thanks, Carrie.
Okay, so that brings us to the CMAC STBG workshop, and I guess is this John?
I hope so. I'm still here.
Great.
Good morning again. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's start knocking these out. I'm gonna give a quick synopsis of kind of how our funding distribution breaks out on our current rounds, on our current methodology. Next slide. If you take a look from a big picture of how we dole out CMAC, STBG, and carbon reduction plans, we normally start at the top. We have a quick set asides for each category, either the reserve, which is now a 5% of the pie that's available. And then there's a GWRC Ride Connect set aside, as well as a FAMPO set aside. As a result, you get about 90% of the pot available, but even then, that's not necessarily available for new applications because we have existing projects that can actually eat up quite a large chunk of that. In previous rounds, it's been over $1 million. This last round, it wasn't so bad, but you can still have cost increases on previous projects eat up. Our big change on the last round is that if you want more than 10% of the previous allocation, you have to go back and kind of burn an application spot. So even though that this is distributed to new applications, you can actually have old projects coming back for new money as a way of moving forward. So it's not all just new projects. Next. From there, after we kind of take chunks out, we distribute it based on mode. So you'll have for STBG, you have a 10% for studies, 15% for transit and active. These are both pulled from the Stafford County TMA, so they're kind of on hold. And then 60% for new or roadway projects or existing roadway projects. So once you break it down, you only get a few $100,000 or a little bit over $1 million available. But also we have an asterisk in our methodology that says you can only get up to 50% of the pot. So divide these by 2, and that's how much money any one single project can receive based on our methodology after set aside. So it actually gets chunked down very quickly depending on what is both submitted as well as basically the fact that we can only fund up to 50%. Next slide. For CMAQ, it's a very similar process, except for we don't have the TMA or studies. So we have 20% for active, 15% for transit, and then 65% for roadways. So we get a little bit over 2 million for roadways in this case. But again, as much as 50% of that money can go to any one project. So it's about $1 million pop for each one of those projects. So next slide. So that's where we stand. So in the previous meeting, we kind of started removing some of the options from the table. I'm very sad that my Tahiti proposal did not get accepted.
Still here.
I mean, y'all can recommend it, bring it back up, resurrect that hope. But these were the items that both y'all requested us look at moving forward and create actual funding pies for. All right, next slide. So the first one up would be the population, the 50-50 based on full population and urbanized population. We're using the 2020 census for that. And then we have a daily vehicle miles traveled, DVMT, kind of a composite allocation that both uses vehicle miles traveled, facility miles, and the population as a composite. And we have one with everything included, and then we have one with I-95 removed, and we're pulling from 2021 VDOT data for that. And then we also re-added in all the current existing set-asides as well as the 7.5% transit set-aside as discussed in the previous. And we're keeping the Stafford TMA set-aside and the FAMPO set-aside there at the bottom as well. So first up, option 1, population composite. It kind of breaks down based on population into about 1 million and 1.5 million larger jurisdictions, and then about just under 300,000 for Fredericksburg, with the transit being the next largest pot. We're still having our reserve set aside and the GDWRC available. On the STBG side, you have slightly smaller pots, just a little bit over 750,000 for Stafford, over 600,000 for Spotsylvania, with the Stafford TMA being the other composite there. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the total number of figures, and you'll start seeing a little bit of a trend moving forward that these total amounts wiggle a little bit, but you're not going to get wild swings between the methodologies. It's usually within about $200,000 of each other. But we applied the current methodology with the set-asides first. We take the remaining balance, applied the next set-asides next. In this case, I applied the regional transit set-aside at that level, along with the Stafford TMA, and then I did the jurisdiction breakout as last. So again, the chunks kind of get smaller as we work down, but that final column total amount kind of gives you an idea of what, at least in FY $30, would be the allocation. So that is population composite. Do you have any questions, or do you want to wait till the end?
Why don't we wait until the
Okay.
end?
All right, fantastic. All right, next slide. Let's look at daily vehicle miles traveled. Again, we're actually seeing a very similar breakout with Stafford County in this situation getting a little bit over 1.3 million. Spotsylvania is a little bit over 1 million, and the city of Fredericksburg is just under $500,000 with the transit set aside. The same amounts are being applied over to the same calculations are being applied over to STBG. Again, the Stafford set aside is remaining the same. It's going to always be that 655,000 based on FY $30. but then you have about 700,000 for Stafford, and then Spotsylvania, a little bit of $500,000 and $250,000 for Fredericksburg. All right, next. Again, we're starting to see a little bit of wiggles in the total volume here, but again, Stafford's right about that 2 million mark. Spotsylvania's just under that, was at 1.7 million mark again, and probably Fredericksburg had most movement. This is probably the most movement that we see for a jurisdiction, where you see it go from about $500,000 up to almost $750,000. But the application or the allocations are basically staying the same, particularly above this line. So we're seeing the movement down here.
And all these figures are for 1 year.
Yes.
So if we only allocate it every 2 years, obviously it doubles.
And so if we move to the next, minus I-95, again, we're seeing actually kind of the same general kind of trend we're within about $100,000 for each one of the jurisdictions. Fredericksburg shrinks a little bit, as well as Stafford kind of is in between. The composite with I-95 removed kind of slots in exactly like dead sit in the middle between the population and the full kind of DB&T composite. So if you want to say which one's kind of in the middle, it will be this option. So if we go to the next slide. Again, you're seeing about 2 million to Stafford, about 1.7 million to Spotsylvania, and then again, Fredericksburg's kind of like right in the middle again with just under 600,000. The previous set of slides are again staying the same, and so that's kind of where the three options kind of fall. And finally, if you do the last slide, you can see the side by sides. You can see that it's about $200,000 difference between the jurisdictions. Fredericksburg kind of varies the most, just because it's always, if you're looking at the percentage, if they go from 6% to 14%, it's a bigger swing for them. But generally speaking, Stafford and Spotsylvania are kind of trading 2% here and there throughout the process. So that's kind of what we're looking like at FY30. If those funds stay the same or increase, it'll, it's a percentage, so the shares will stay the same, but the dollar values will shift slightly. So that basically concludes kind of.
Is that the last slide?
Yep.
Did you want to talk about just the TBB agreement or basically the other attachments?
Okay. So with the did you actually, big question, what specific questions do you have about those? So I don't just do a gigantic, slow summary about probably stuff that folks already know about.
It's like the actual MOU, you don't have to go into all the details, but I didn't know if you want, okay.
I had just
Happy.
asked that they be provided, just to be able to read through and have an understanding of what's in
Okay.
them. So that was it. I didn't have any specific questions, just wanted the background information. But we'll come up with policy committee with our board members, so we have it if needed.
With the letter, that was the instruction that we must review the MOU, and then the MOU document is the another review of the MOU last time. Yeah, so just from my side, and then I'll shut up and we will negotiate as much as you want. When I started this process, I did not I was not planning to redo those set-asides for the TMA and all that have been long-standing and were negotiated through lots of fighting. I wasn't planning to reopen that whole thing and, whatever GWRC's, the GW Ride Connect money is and all of that. I wasn't starting that whole thing. In other words, I wasn't planning to throw out the whole methodology and start with a blank sheet. What I was trying to do is to make the jurisdictional portions easy, so that you don't have to always fight about how the metrics are applied and whether it's point so-and-so air quality improvement and all that kind of jazz with us, where you would get a formula to allocate the remainder of the funds, and whatever formula you're all comfortable with is fine by me. I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours renegotiating the TMA. It'll take a long time, and there'll be lots of screaming, and we'll go back to the mess we had before, and I'm not suggesting we do that. I'm just trying to cut out that you have to fight for your money every year. Move to you get an allocation which long in advance, so you can plan, and you get to decide whether you want to put all your money on one project or put it over 5 projects or whatever. That would be entirely up to you, provided what FAMPA will do, and it will remain in the methodology because we have no option, and that is that FAMPA will confirm that your project qualifies for CMAQ because it meets the criteria that are restrictive on CMAQ and the same for STGB. So we will still review the projects, just in terms of, is it actually eligible for CMAQ or CR or HIP funding or STGB funding or whatever it is. We'll do that part. We don't.
For the screening, so we do that as a part of the process, rather than picking it.
Yeah, we won't stop screening your project, but we will not tell you how much money to put on your projects and which projects to put the money on. That'll be entirely your thing. If we can agree some sort of formula, and I'm agnostic to which one, I just hope we can find some fair formula that works for everybody. Or, they say the best negotiation is when everybody leaves the room just slightly unhappy. That's usually what you end up with. Anyway, Mr. Chair, over to the
So let's go to Stafford first, since Marcio, I think you guys were last.
I don't have any comments.
No comments ago. The city.
Before Mike leaves, do you have any comments? No. So I would just say, are we just discussing options or where we are with the options?
Yeah, options, or I guess anything else we want to talk about.
So ultimately, our comments from the last meeting haven't changed. We're looking at the scope of, or the intent of both CMAQ and STBG. And I know we talked about having different methodologies, CMAQ versus STBG, and I would be in favor of keeping it simple and keeping it one of the 3 categories that we end up deciding on, as opposed to having one category, for example, population, and one category DVMT. I think that's, and not to discount anybody else's thoughts, but I think that's silly. I think we should be consistent in that, so.
Thank you. Any other comments from the city? Veery?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge fan of the removal of the I-95 option. I'll say that one, to me, seems to make the least amount of sense personally, and when we've had discussions internally at Beery about, these 3 concepts, or when we had more concepts on the table, option 2A seemed to make the most sense because it does consider population, but really the DVMT, which is the roadway's need. If every roadway has like an appetite for improvements, that indicates the highest appetite for each roadway. That seems to be the most equitable source of funding. I agree with Jamie that, let's pick one methodology for all the different modes and not have it be a Frankenstein's monster. But I think this, as Ian said, is going to be really helpful for long-range planning, because maybe in the first year it'll be herky-jerky, but now all the jurisdictions will know years in advance what they're getting. And even more, if we go with the DVMT concept option, you'll be able to actually estimate what your funding would be if you make changes to the roadway or to development patterns or whatever, because the models can then spit out in 2030 and 2050, DVMT on these facilities will be X. So population, we don't know what's going to happen with population. People could stop having babies. People would have a lot of babies. They could all move away. They could all move here, right? But with DVMT, I mean, it's much less predictable than you put in a new housing development. You know how much DVMT you're going to get.
I don't live in Fredericksburg, but I'm stopping having babies.
Or Nick, maybe you could have been a stand-up comedian. Huh?
You don't want me anywhere near a microphone.
Yeah.
But anyway, that I think that's, to me, feels the most, and to Veery feels the most equitable allocation of money.
Sorry, Jamie, did you want to make another comment?
I was just gonna say, we're in agreement with Nick's comment, and basically looking at STBG in particular, it's talking about what those roadways and networks will look like in the future, which we think should fit the 95 corridor as well, so.
Okay. Say, for us, we did basically talk to some of our policy board members, and we're basically not comfortable with any of these options right now. So we're thinking it might just be better to stick up with kind of the methodology. not make any changes.
I would strongly disagree with that.
You're going against our board members.
Your board members?
Yes.
Yeah, you're saying. The current methodology does not adequately assess benefits of projects. Comes nowhere close to doing it. So,
Explain.
so congestion, it just discusses where the most congested roads are. Doesn't discuss how we're improving those. The safety methodology doesn't discuss how the project impacts, number of crashes. It just says the project's total impact could be this. So I do have a number of concerns on the current methodology.
So how would this methodology address those concerns?
This methodology would get rid of any of all of that and just suggest a straightforward.
But we would address any of those concerns.
I'm not, my intention is not to address those concerns in one whole methodology. The intention is to say, have one process that makes sense with one metric. And then it'd be up to the jurisdictions to address those concerns with our projects and what we feel is best for congestion benefits or safety benefits.
I'm gonna say just with the next census, it's an open question, what's gonna happen with the TMA? It seems like with that, you know, I mean, way it could go the other.
Correct.
But I mean, if it does change and we're all the same TMA, then, you know, just this, you know, North Stafford versus the rest of the region issue goes away.
We have numbers for the census.
What about for 2030?
Yes, but we've got the current numbers in the presentation, I think.
If we talk about the connection between.
I know what it is.
Fredericksburg.
I know what he's talking about, but if you just look at that number there, we're at 167, 679. And you need to, in the urbanized area, grow by 32,500 people. It's in order for Fredericksburg to be its own independent TMA. Alternatively, you need the gap between those two to join, right? And we all thought we'd get closer to that gap joining and those numbers being realized this time. But in fact, because they changed the metric, we really didn't get any closer to either of those things happening. So unless they go reverse the changes to the metrics, it's actually going to take longer than we think for any of those two things to happen, simply because they've made it harder to get urbanized area, basically. And so that is going to mean it's going to be longer for us to get either of those two to join, or for that Fredericksburg urbanized area to grow to 200. Both will eventually happen, I'm convinced of that. But it seems to me like it's the Census Bureau's criteria have slowed that process down.
Either way, whether there is a TMA connection or not, at least staff, it doesn't affect, you know, my side of changing that.
But frankly, we could agree a methodology from now until 2030, and then after the census in 2030. If I'm wrong and one of those two things happen, then there'd have to be a whole new methodology, because we would now get different funding, we'd get a different pot of funding, so we'd have a different amount of money to hand out that is got slightly different rules.
What additional funding would we get?
So the TMA funding that we get from the TPB right now would change. The whole of FAMPO would get TMA funding as an independent urbanized area, or alternatively, we would get joined to DC, in which case all of our numbers would get added. So this southern TMA, if you like, would also get a slice of the DC TMA funding, which would be a much bigger chunk of money. One of those two things will happen, and I don't know which one will happen, or if any. I'm guessing it's now going to take longer to get there, but that's what would happen. So that the STGB money would grow substantially, but it can't happen for the urbanized areas get revised. So 2030 is the census, and as we saw this last time, it takes about 2 years or so before they actually publish the new urbanized areas. So you're looking at 2032, we'll get notified ultimately of the fact that we are now an independent urbanized area, or that we've now joined the DC urbanized area in toto. So that's 2032 is when we would be told. So we have to continue to operate from now until 2032 with a methodology. VDOT hasn't made any comment on what's been going on here or any of the other members, anybody, the chair.
Would anyone
Is there
in the
anyone
back
else?
row like to speak? The member of the committee.
We're supposed to have a VDOT person here at the table.
Oh, yeah, Linda was the one that was, taking the place of Cassie, so, on the TAC, but I don't know that we have specific comment on, I think, we wanna make sure that everything, the feds agree with all of the, methodology, and I know you've been coordinating. And Linda's just jumping into this now, so I don't wanna put her on the spot.
Sure.
But if she has something,
Cassie's all along has said this is a discussion outside of VDOT, and that we will, of course, provide support and whatnot, but it needs to be a decision among the MPO.
Do we have anybody online from PRTC? And do they have any comment, Mr. Chair?
No.
Nobody online, okay.
I'll just say, this change won't really impact the GW Ride Connect, GW receive, allocation, but I think there's value in the localities knowing year to year what amount of money they're gonna get, and to have the autonomy to make those decisions at the local level about what projects are gonna be most impactful for them, rather than going through the scoring process, which every time we go through it, we realize that we don't like the criteria and we want to tweak them, and it's a large drain on FAMPO staff time. I think that time could be better spent doing other things, so I think there's value in continuing moving this conversation forward.
We have changed the current methodology every year. Literally every year we've changed it, and that we didn't intend to, but every year somebody wasn't happy with the results of the previous year, so we changed the methodology again. So we're worse than Smart Scale, because we're moved every year, we move the damn line somewhere, and then we as staff have to try and score based on the new line, and then one of the other people don't like it that round, and then so this current scores that get produced are not everyone's liking, and then we have to go into the little methodological squiggles and go, no, our projects don't score well because there's this little thing here that we need to change, and then we go and argue about those little things every year. I really don't want to do this every year.
I do have.
We decided to do it every 2 years though, right?
Now, we've decided that we will allocate money every 2 years, correct? If people stick to the
And we're
current
not-
agreement.
Right, and we're not doing it this year, right?
Well,
Still?
we are starting in fall because we didn't do it last fall.
Okay.
So this coming fall, we would do it again, and we would make 2 years worth of allocations next March, when VDOT gives us numbers. Although with the current administration, we have no idea what that's going to look like.
Just a question. I'm not say anything that VDOT hasn't for ERPT, I think, but just a question is MBTA's did MBTA say anything about their experience with that one, something like this? Do they find that it provides the predictability?
They really like it. What happens is if you go on the website of the individual counties and cities in the MBTA area, they actually publish on their website. We get 13.7% of the regional money, so that they know long in advance what they're going to get. They publish it on their county website, and then they get to choose their projects, and they seem to like it a lot because they've not tried to reverse out of that process. They've got the one additional thing which we don't have, and that is that their final recommendation has to still be approved by the TPB. So the TPB is like a watchdog to check that they implemented according to the rules. Although the weird thing is that they don't haven't reduced their methodology to paper, to writing. They've got 10 steps, and we put in the previous presentation of the 10 steps that they use, and they follow those 10 steps, but they don't actually publish like any further details of the mechanism as to how they achieve each of those 10 steps. There seems to be some staff level negotiating each time it goes around, but certainly they're very happy with the outcomes. And then the TBB are happy because MBTA does all the work, and then they just get to vote yay or nay on the result, whether they approve of the result. And everybody gets something every year because it's a percentage calculation.
I was just gonna ask, if something were to be a multi-jurisdictional project that would cross lines, that just be up to whoever was involved in that and what funding they could allocate to it?
The two jurisdictions would have to agree to push the project, which they have to anyway, because you can't have a project that does that. And then they would need to decide how much money they would put on the project. Currently, invariably, we make each project one jurisdiction's project. There are very few that physically cross the boundary. Maybe a bike path, maybe a bridge over the river. But those projects seem to come up very rarely.
As a regional entity, I wasn't sure from the regional point of view how you were fair.
And part of this problem is that it's such a little money.
Yeah.
It's with the current inflation rate, CMAC and SDG are going to be a smaller and smaller percentage of the pie. It's just, what do you get for $3 million? Like, I mean, I don't know. I've asked before, but nobody ever wants to tell me what.
I mean, it's a good buy down for bigger projects, like we were talking earlier about smart scale and, local match and everything. I mean, if a jurisdiction said, let's take 2 years of our CMAC, that's a couple $1 million, put it on a $50 million project. I mean, that makes moves, so.
I was gonna say,
Not in small scale, because as
Well-
you saw, you need 70% of the money. in
Yeah,
small
right.
scale if you want it to actually mean it.
Melody's online and wants to say something.
I was gonna say
no.
for FX to go, the local match really does help us. And it sounds like we're really, like last time it sounded like everyone was pretty close. And I agree with you, one methodology would really help. Is it possible potentially to create a survey of what people are liking and not liking specifically to try to fix those issues so we can move forward with it?
Sure.
So I think like when this was initially discussed, there was the NVTA proposal, which is straight population, and Rodney and I had basically support to like investigate that, but we've kind of morphed into some different options. The NVTA proposal is not one of the 3 options that's gone on this sheet. We do not have support for any of these options.
What is the NVTA proposal?
Straight population.
Wasn't that?
It would be
Oh, it's
basically,
perfect, sorry.
yeah, so the one is basically, it would be like 100% total population. That's what NVTA
Okay,
does.
so what is the issue with putting that back on the table as an option? Would you guys?
Could do that. I mean, if we do that, we might be able to get support.
I'd be fine putting it back on the table as an option, just so I can continue moving forward with discussion.
Was that the one that didn't give very much to like Fredericksburg or Frederick Regional Transit?
There is Paul has introduced a 7.5% funding of CMAC for transit, in addition to whatever the localities get. But yes, it gives the lowest funding allocations to the city of Fredericksburg as a city. And then the 7.5% is separate from that.
So just add one thing, like the different scenarios we're discussing don't impact transit. We're talking about 7.5% for transit across any scenario.
Okay, so I can kind of give you this number kind of working off memory. So if you go straight population, Fredericksburg basically loses about 10% here. It drops down to about 8.7-ish. And so it comes out to about $380,000 on that one. Spotsylvania and Stafford. Stafford moves up to, I think, 49.9. As a part of that, and then Spotsylvania jumps to just under a 41.2. And as a result, you see about a $50,000 jump for both Spotsylvania and Stafford here. So Fredericksburg loses about $50,000, and then that's kind of split between the jurisdictions there.
Can't, because 50 doesn't equal 50 plus 50.
Sorry, I said 50,000 for each. I meant 50,000 split between each of the jurisdictions, because it's basically you just drop Fredericksburg by about 10%. So
What you're saying is that Spotsylvania and Stafford would get about $25,000 per year more,
yes,
and the city would lose about $50,000 from those numbers.
yes, a little bit more, but yes.
Under which proposal?
Population.
A straight population.
Well, that's not on.
Okay, not this population.
This is
So-
urbanized.
Yeah, okay.
Urbanized population, what you have going on that's a little bit kind of behind the scenes is that Spotsylvania has about 50,000 people outside of the
Outside of their-
urbanized area. Stafford has about 40,000, and then naturally that isn't calculated for the city because it's basically 100%
I
in
see.
there. And so it's kind of like looking at what's in FAMPO and the
Mm.
Stafford TMA as far as that's kind of driving, or at least our organization's
Mm.
population, doing that as a way to balance. So basically, in theory, for every person who's living inside the FAMPO or urbanized area, they're getting $2. For everybody who's living outside of the urbanized area, they're still getting $1, but that's kind of what the composite is quietly doing behind the scenes.
Okay.
So the difference for Spotsylvania for going to the total population is about $25,000-ish. There's a more accurate number, but that's what the difference is.
Doesn't seem useful to make the change for $25,000 in my opinion, but
Per year.
per year, yeah. I mean, I'm not in favor of option one anyway, so it doesn't matter to me, but.
Jamie?
So just from our board, we're not in favor of population only. We mentioned that in the last meeting. It doesn't speak to the intent of both CMAC and SCBG. So I don't want us to move further away than we were in the last meeting and go back. I know y'all have to go back to your boards and discuss that with them. But if we're gonna move forward, I think we should continue moving forward on the path that we had when we discussed last meeting, which includes those options, which again, we may end up deferring to all of us, deferring to our boards and letting them hash this out, because I'm not sure if your board is going back to the status quo that we are able. So.
Yeah, I just don't think we have consensus on this. I think if this were to go to FAMPA, it'd be a complete disaster. I think we should take this.
Can I suggest one more try? So what I'm going to suggest is I want to report back to the policy committee that we haven't got a solution, that there are these three plus Spotsylvania preferred option, which is straight population, and that we would like to, I mean, hear they, if they have comments, just hear their comments, no decisions, nobody's making any decision. Just hear what they have to say about where we are so far, and then I'll bring back this thing one last time to the TAC to see if there's any movement. If there's no movement, you know, short of taking a vote, we won't get anywhere, but I just want to have one more try.
Sure.
Well, I mean, would you be in favor of taking a vote after one more try? Seeing where things fall down?
I mean, I think eventually most things, big decisions, we have to have a vote. But I mean, if it's going to tear FAMPO in half, I'd rather not do that. But I'd like to maybe just hear some verbal comments from policy committee and then come back here and have one last shot. And if that doesn't work, then, you know, I can't force anybody to do anything. So I won't try and force anybody. I've said before, if we can't get a reasonable agreement where everybody's just a little bit unhappy, then I'm not gonna go and die in a ditch on this. It just, I think, makes better sense to do a simple thing like this, where you get predictability, get a regular income, you can plan your future. And also what I like about this, and maybe not all of you like that, but what I like about this is that you can put the money on whatever project you want, as long as it complies with CMAQ requirements and STGB requirements. So I remove myself and the FAMPO staff from the discussion of what you want to do with the money. You do whatever you want to do with it, provided it must meet the requirements. That's what I think is the better part of this. That we don't have to anymore score your projects. We just have to screen them in to make sure that they comply. If not, we've got to go back to scoring all your projects again, and I can just see that 12 months from now, you're going to all want to change the methodology again because your projects didn't do well, or they did well, or whatever, and then you're going to want to change one of the items. And okay, we may change it every second year, but it's still every cycle you're going to want to change the metrics.
Matthew?
I think just in a little bit of a rebuttal, at least on mine, it's not whether a project does well or not, but it's the same concerns I brought up when we were doing this 2 years ago. They don't, our scoring system doesn't show actual benefits of projects. I brought up population years ago and that got shot down, so we went with something that everyone could generally agree upon. It still doesn't actually show the benefits of projects. It truly does not.
So that's our problem as FAMPO staff, is that every metric in this big package of metrics, right, that we have to score, there's always one metric that somebody thinks isn't good enough, right? And remember, we are not the final arbiters of things like congestion or air quality or whatever. There's even the federal and state metrics. Look at the OIP metrics for smart scale. The only reason we don't fight with them more is because they don't tell us how they apply those metrics. They just refuse to tell us because of what happens. Someone like Matthew, who is passionate about one particular metric and has done a lot of research into that metric, has got a view on that metric and wants it done a certain way. But then we have to get all the other jurisdictions to agree on a replacement metric. And this happens every cycle at FAMPO, every single cycle. We try and tune that metric even more, and it becomes a game, right? It becomes a game of pushback, other jurisdictions or whoever doesn't agree, and then there's pushback, and then we do it again, and we do it again, and we do it again, and we do it again. And it's all for a very small amount of money that we have this going on every year or every cycle, because now it'll be every 2 years. And frankly, it just seems like a waste of all of our effort to spend all that time when we're $25,000 out from what could work. It just feels like it's unnecessary because we are not VDOT and we are not OIP and we are not the federal government. We are just, once the score's done and the money's handed out, the scores mean nothing. They don't go anywhere. They're just a means for us to allocate funding. So that's why I suggested a formula, because then it's off the top and I don't have to
Just
do
a
that every year.
comment for consideration. I mean, if FAMPO ever had a much larger amount of money, which could happen in the future. Yeah, basically having something in place that could be useful.
In 2032 would be the first time that would happen, and we don't have to have anything. We don't have to have a prioritization methodology, even if the money gets bigger. You can still use the formula. That's why we went to ask Federal Highways and VDOT and everybody about this, because it doesn't matter what size the money is, or would they support us doing this? And Northern Virginia has got a much bigger budget, and they still use a simple formula. The size of the money doesn't force us to do something differently.
So Ian is going to go to the policy committee and talk about this, and we'll kind of bring this back for discussion next month.
That's my suggestion. I mean, I can't, but my suggestion is I just basically update them on where we are in the discussion.
Right.
Not tell them what I think they should do, just say, this
Right.
is where we are. Do you have any comments? Please, we're not asking you to make any decisions. just give us your comments. I'll take those back to you guys. If the comments are give up,
Yeah.
well, then I'll give up. If the comments are try one more time, we'll try at the next meeting and see if we can find a way.
I was gonna ask you, the previous one that, the whole presentation, did that have that, is it percentages or was it actually putting in dollar amounts?
So like the previous round or the
Mhm.
previous population?
Well, no, when you presented this before, because I know that was one of the things that I think was
Yeah, no, so
very helpful, and I
we
don't
did
know.
primarily percentages and then it was the TAC requested the actual dollar amounts for those.
The
Right, so.
so I'll be frank with you, the problem with that, just like full disclosure, is you see this first remainder, second remainder, the way the methodology is written now is that those set-asides are calculated off the top. So it's a percentage of a different pie than when you get to the bottom.
Yeah.
The pie is not the same. So we tried for a whole week, John and I and Lida, and I drove them nuts. Because every time we put a pie together, we're like, what do we do with the set-asides? Because it's, for example, the reserve set-aside is 5% of the total. But when you get to the second remainder, it's not 9.8% of the total. It's 9.8% of the remainder after you've taken the 5% off. So how do you show that in pie charts? Because I eventually said to John, change it. And then when I went and looked at what he changed it to, frankly, can ask him, I told him that's dishonest. I told him the percentages are dishonest because what you're doing is you're showing a percentage of a percentage and it's not honest anymore. So I'm nervous about that. This table is fine instead of a pie.
No, I
You
think
look down the percentages, but you can't put this into one pie because the
Right.
pie is not, it's 3 pies.
But I think where some of I think this provides some value and a view that the percentages didn't always, because, you know, when the pie overall is smaller, then I think it gives people a little perspective as to the dollar value that they're arguing between. And I just think that that adds value. And so I thought the last time I went to policy committee, it wasn't shown as absolute dollars. So I think this all
It's
by itself
better,
is a
yeah.
different thing, so it would be something new to present to them, so I think.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how I'm showing.
So there, the jurisdictional percentages are still there in a column, so you can see them, but then we put the dollar value so you can see that you're only talking about a small difference in dollars.
And that's the frustration. You're so close, it's such a small amount of money. So.
I mean, we can only try if they don't like it, or if you guys don't like it at all, there's nothing I can do. I'll just show it one more time and then we're done.
I'll just say, I mean, I know we haven't agreed on which methodology we would be able to get behind, but I think most people in this room agree that doing something like this would be better than what we're currently.
No, as far as Virginia said they would do status quo.
Yeah.
If we put the fourth option, I mean, I can change this presentation and add just population pool to this presentation plus one extra option. So 4 options instead of 3, and
Sure.
put the population one back and send it to, I don't think any of the other jurisdictions are going to agree with that one option, but let's see, right? I can, all of these options, let's put back the one that we removed, which is population on its own, just to show them the numbers, and then ask them if they have any guidance for the TAC or comments to make on the process.
Kathy.
Only other thing I'll say, and just to Kate's point, you know, last meeting and this meeting, there seems to be a general idea that everyone is in agreement that something on the screen is better than what we're currently doing. So if there's agreement among this committee that something is better than what we're currently doing that's on the screen, maybe that's what can be told to policy committee. If TAC agrees that there's something better, one of these options, let's do our best to work towards something that's better out there.
So I don't know that we should say that though.
Yeah,
Jim.
I'll say we can't say that because the city, whenever we've submitted a project, we fared better than if we would have gone with population only. And since we don't think population only speaks to the requirements anyway or the intent of the grants anyway, so
Great. And that's why I'm just saying one of the options, everyone's agreement is better, someone likes it. Just, they don't like other options that are on the screen. So there's something up there that's someone likes, but just not the other parts of it.
So I would like to close this discussion. I know we have a couple other agenda items to go through. Thank you all. I will talk to you about this next month.
Right,
That brings us to number 8, staff.
thank you. These 2 letters, Becky, you want to help me with this?
Yes, the safety performance target letter, as we've done in prior years, we have the state's, target, to adopt and per region.
Scroll down, please. So what we've done each year is that we've taken the state's goal for our region. And so we, assuming that the TAC wants us to do the same. If you don't, then you have to calculate all these items yourself and come up with metrics to substitute. So we have in the past always done that. Before I signed it, I wanted you to all have input. If you have anything else that you want to add.
Matthew.
I agree, and I think what we're doing is fine. One thing outside of the scope of this I'd be interested in seeing is, we talk about benefits of projects. All the projects that are currently in the 6-year plan in the Fredericksburg district, I'd be interested in getting a better understanding of, based off the smart scale analysis or crash modification factors, how much they could help to reduce annually crashes or different types of crashes. Just to get a better idea of how close are we getting to meeting some of these targets? Because the question is, are the projects we're doing actually gonna help us meet that target? I assume they are, but just trying to get more in the project.
So I understand that. Does VDOT have any statistics at the end? I know at the end of each year, they measure this region against whatever the targets are. Do you have the results of that, like targets achieved and what any impacts are?
I can check with our folks in traffic and ops, so they would have that. As far as trying to come up, I think, Matthew, you're talking about a kind of a prediction. We have a lot of projects that I think look to make improvements here that are everything from trench widening, strips, and those types of things that, I don't know that we have that specific scoring for all.
Yeah, it'd definitely be a work effort to do.
Yeah.
So what we have though is that Becky taught this at UVA or somewhere, and you've got
Well, what we
a
do,
particular type of intervention usually has a particular type of outcome, right? So rumble strips produce X.
It's a crash modification factor.
But I don't think anybody has done, and I certainly don't want to do it, to go in and try to calculate that in situ for a particular corner, right? I think that the factors that produce those outcomes, which are, here's a question, how does OIP calculate the safety improvements? What do they actually use for small scale?
Fixed off of EPDO. Weights each type of crash, build severe accident gets 170.
Crashes on the past.
Yes, past 5 years of data within 250 intersection, and it says here's your crash modification factor. Roundabout, they publish a C list, which is on the website. Let's say 1,000. That's your EPDO reduction.
So is that not sufficient?
They just do it for smart scale projects.
So we have a lot of.
And when a pipeline study happens, does the pipeline study not do that?
right, that they'll say what purple crash. What I looked at historical, aren't even in the 6-year. So I can provide person of very good news.
If you could send that to Matthew, that would help.
That's the
The
actual
second,
change, yeah.
the second thing we can do is that we are going to sometime from the 1st of July, look at our CLRP, right? So when you all decide which projects you'd like us to add to the CLRP, we can then calculate that for those specific projects, because
Yeah.
there is a specific outcome then.
Yes,
The
that makes
specific
sense.
outcome is this project's gonna go in the CLRP. I don't wanna do it now in between, sort of on a
Yeah.
bunch of projects, which
So
are,
this is another suggestion maybe to get at kind of what Matthew's looking at. Instead of maybe looking at all the projects and seeing like, what kind of accents are there. What if basically, Fampa Diversity tried to get basically just the top safety concerns in either Diversity or Fampo? And I think that VDOT used to have a top 100 in the district
PSI,
list. Yeah, I mean, you
Potential
could look at
safety.
that and see which ones are in Diversity and Fampo, and maybe once you have that, like, let's say it's 75 of them, you could say like, well, do we have projects to address these? And then maybe we find we only have projects for half of them, and the other half, or maybe something we should focus on for smart scale. Yes, Kathy?
Have a list similar to that we've looked at, and I would say that most of those locations, my computer's dead now, but most of those locations either have projects or maybe have recently, or they're ones, so one that is on the list that does not have a current project is right there in front of Central Park, so it's Route 3, right by 95, and that is not that it isn't for lack of want of a project, it's trying to find a project that we can implement to meet all the needs that are in that location. So, I think there are a lot of different things. The HSIP project should be part of the 6-year plan. I'm not sure. I mean, they're not going to be the larger, like intersection improvement projects in many cases. They've gone to more systemic type projects. And I see a lot of those come across my desk, actually. I've looked at, say, 2 or 3 in the past week of not specifically all for this area, so other parts of the district as well. But those are ones that we're trying to meet a lot of these. I mean, these are big targets to hold, so I think we do have some information. It's not all in one place. But if you guys give us some different things, we can start, kind of making some lists.
does VDOT no longer have a top 100 safety needs or safety
I
locations?
think that's what Matthew was talking about, the PSI list. So we have that.
So you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, you have it.
It's from 2022.
Could be, I don't
Probably
I
due
don't
for
know exactly when they have.
Okay.
I guess really the only other thing I'll add is we kind of do it for congestion already, the travel demand model. Because VMT is one of the ones up there, so we can get a sense by 2050 what we'll be at based on our projects and population growth. We don't really do anything for safety, so it'd be interested.
So let's look at it when we redo the CLRP in July, because then it's gonna contribute to a conversation about which projects we put in the CLRP.
And it contributes to Paul's point to smart scale.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, is there anyone who is not happy for us to go with the statewide targets for this?
Any concerns with the statewide targets? Do you need a motion to approve?
There is no formal process laid out as to how we do this, but I've generally said I don't sign this thing until the TAC, who are the technical advisory people, have had a weigh in on this. So if you want a resolution, that's great, but I'm going to sign it unless somebody says, no, you shouldn't.
So I guess I'll ask for a motion to approve the statewide targets as shown on the screen.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Done.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. The next one is just a self-certification statement. It's typically signed by the executive director of GWRC, it's got to do with Americans with Disability Act and discrimination and all that kind of thing. So it's just a general office thing. So we have again just asked the executive director to sign it. He is effectively the office FOIA appointed representative as well. So it just makes sense that he also signs this.
So do you need
We
action on
don't,
this?
no,
Okay.
we're just letting you know that we have done it. There it is. If anybody needs a copy that to say that we pay attention to the Disabilities Act, we pay attention to the Older Americans Act, etc., we do. There's the signed document saying that we do, and it's in our policies. So we don't need any action.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. Next meeting is on March 3rd. Next meeting will be at 9:30. Make sure the announcement 9:30. So see you then. Thank you.
Thanks,
Motion to
everyone.
adjourn. Second, all in favor? Aye.
Look at it.
Good job.
They're already in there.
Yeah.